Okay, so welcome back to another exciting tutorial inside of Maya, and today we're going to be covering the second part of the tutorial that we started last week, giving us an introduction into texturing. Now, this week we're going to continue on making our first textures inside of Photoshop, which means that you'll need some form of image editing program. If you don't have access to Photoshop, well, you can do the same type of exercise inside of GIMP or inside of Critter or inside of any other image manipulation software that you have handy. Hopefully something better than Microsoft Paint, because you might need to be editing some of the images that we're using in order to make some nice textures. And I also want to show you a little bit more about some of the useful tools which are hidden inside of Maya for helping us do some UV unwrapping. And also I'd like to show you guys the very start of trying to combine different texture maps together in order to create a little bit of a better looking wooden material inside of Arnold. So with all of that, let's pick up where we left off last week and let's start looking at how to start unwrapping our objects and getting our UV templates into Photoshop. So let's take this object over here, this little crate, and let's actually work in a very manual mode for actually unwrapping its UVs. There are some automated tools that I'll show you in the next example, but what I want to do with this one specifically is select the entire object and just go straight into automatic mapping. Now, if I go into automatic mapping, what it's going to do is that it's going to break out all of the UV shells which are inside here based on having some projection planes, which if I look outside in Maya over here, there's basically like 6 planes out in the distance, which it's looking at this object, and it's kind of like looking at the top face, the side face, and it's breaking them all up in the angles that it has in its automatic settings over here. So effectively it's like projecting every face in the box over here. Now, what happens is that I end up with every single UV broken up into a specific shell over here. And you'll see that hopefully if I go into shell mode over here, you'll see that Maya's made some connections, but it's also created all of this huge amount of UV information for each one of the little segments which is inside this box. I'm going to be using some of the move and sew tools to actually piece all of this back together again. So what I'm going to do is shift and select all of the squares of the crate over here, which should be the polygon faces of the inside of each one of these crate parts, and I'm going to start moving them just here into the side. Now, normally when I'm piecing UVs back together again, so effectively gluing all of this stuff back into a single tile, a single shell, I normally start working off the actual UV shell, and when things are complete, I move them back in. You saw me do that briefly early on. But what I want to do is come over here, and I'm going to change very briefly into edge selection mode over here, and I'm going to select an edge over here. Now, as I mentioned before, when we move these things, you're going to see that the edges are connected to one another, because Maya does a good job at distinguishing that this selection over here, even though it looks like in 2 parts in the UV editor, is actually a single edge inside of the viewport. So this is useful because I can grab this little edge over here, and I know that it's connected to something else because it highlights over here in my UV editor. The fun thing about this is that I can come into here and I can actually use a command that is called move and sew UV edges. And if I click on this, it's going to grab that little piece and it's going to move it over here onto the side. Again, I can grab another edge over here and I can select move and sew. Again, I'll zoom in here so that you guys can see what happens as soon as I push that button. I'm going to hit move and sew UV edges and it adds the UV edge down there. Again, the repeat command keyboard shortcut G can be really handy for this because it can allow me to move and sew an edge, move and sew an edge, and now if I go into shell mode, you'll see that I've added all of these little edges on the side over here by moving them with the tools. Now this would be really laborious if I have to grab this edge, move it all the way over here, and find where it's connected to, like that. The Move and Sew tool allows me to work really quickly. So what I'm doing in my mind is kind of like taking this model of what do I see here? How could I turn it almost like into a paper model over here? And right now it's very nicely connected like that, but I know that this will be connected to another one of these faces over here, which is probably this one over here. So before I do that, these little edges here, I'm just going to connect them up as well by going into edge mode over here, and I'm going to select just one of those edges there, tap G on my keyboard. Oops, I actually might need to select both of them, so let me just click there, there, come on, G. Why aren't you selecting? I'm just going to switch to UV mode, select those UVs, and probably G's not working because I've typed on another command probably. So I'm going to come over here into Move and Sew, UV edges, and there we go. I selected a little bit too much. There we go. So let's come back to edges over here. Let's do Move and Sew. There we go. And there you go. You forget yourself of thinking about, oh, I've selected something wrong. No, it's just because you changed the command that you were selecting. So again, I'm just going to go Move and Sew, select one of these, Move and Sew, and now you're going to see that they're all welded together like that. That would introduce a little bit of stretching, but again, because it's hidden away inside of this area over here, we hopefully won't see it that much. Again, you have to start making those calls of kind of like seeing if that's the way that you should do. Now, ring and loop are always going to be really useful as well, but you can also make selections like this. Like I can select all of this, the entire type of like shape and edges, and if I do another Move and Sew, it's now going to move, and all of these interior faces, they've already been sewn together. And now I've just brought in this other UV tile over here. So very quickly I've made a little 2D version of this, and if I wanted to look at this with a checker pattern on, I can see, ooh, getting some little kind of like artifacting coming from my viewport display over here. So I might just see what happens if I switch this to Legacy Viewport. No advantage whatsoever. Okay, keep it in Viewport 2.0. Yeah, there'll be a few mistakes like that. And I think that's just because of that specific UV area. I'm just going to come over here and grab my shells. I'm almost convinced that if I grab all of these up here, this little bug over here I might be able to just solve by going into another UV tile, and it seems like it works fine. I think that's just a graphics card error more than anything else, but that's a little bit weird. But now you guys can see that, hey presto, there we have all of these little squared tiles all the way across my UVs. That's a good segue for me to actually start talking to you guys about just another little thing that's important. Because we're still working with this idea that all of these UVs have to be as square pixels as possible, it's important that when you're laying your UVs out, that all of the things that we've glued together should look like perfect little squares on top of our screen like that. If you see UVs that kind of look like this, and I'm just going to do an exaggerated view, where you see that I'm using the scale tool and they all look like little rectangles, that's wrong, and you want to make sure that you're using the scale tools or to actually make sure that each one of these faces inside of the cube has like a little UV tile that's as square as possible, and that's why we have this little check pattern tool in Maya 2017 over here that I'm turning on and off right now, just to make sure that that is proportionally the right size. I'm then going to repeat the process with all the rest of the actual tiles that I did over here as well. But remember that we worked very quickly earlier if we know the selection methods. I'm going to do this again one at a time, and then I'll do all the other ones really quickly. So what am I going to do? Well, again, I'm going to be using Move and Sew to connect all of my edges together. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to choose the edge mode over here. I'm going to choose the top edge, and I'm going to do Move and Sew UV edges. Then I'm going to select the next edge and hit G on my keyboard, hit the bottom edge, G on my keyboard, G on my keyboard to repeat Move and Sew again and again and again and again. Then I'm going to grab one of these edges on the side and hit Move and Sew, Move and Sew, Move and Sew, and one last time, Move and Sew. So you see that what I'm doing is I'm building these little corners into here. A little bit of stretching, but that's fine because I still have the outside area to work with. And then I can just do a multiple selection like this, and I can do Move and Sew, and it connects up all together. If you know how to do your selections the process becomes really quick, because I can click and drag and select all of those edges and hit G, and it will do a move and sew. It just jumped over here to the other side, but that's still fine. I can grab all of these guys again and do a quick move and sew, and that will connect everything up in the way that I want. If you don't believe me, let's go to UV modes and just do always a little check to make sure that everything's connected together. That's connected together. That's connected together. But that's speed and efficiency, guys. I don't want to sell this to you guys as like little kind of like tools that this will work all the time. This will work because it's this shape, and I know that this quick selection tool will work because I've practiced it before I've actually come to show you guys. So again, if you know how to do your edge selection modes and you've got a good mental model of how these things could be connected, you can be very quick at making the decisions of connect this, move and sew, connect this, move and sew. And as again, we can just do it with a few keyboard shortcuts or the buttons. Always feel comfortable doing whatever you want to do. But again, as things move around, again, I've got a little jumping shell over here. Remember that we're going to have to move things aside, change modes, go back into edge mode over here, and again I'm just going to hit G on my keyboard. If I know, as soon as I use the move tool, that stops working. There we go. So that's all connected together. I'm going to grab these guys over here, I'm going to do a G over there. Yep, that one stayed in place. You can see mine can be a bit temperamental in some cases. There we go. Hit G over there. It jumps over to the other side of the page. Oops. Nope, that's right, that's right. Always double check what your Maya is doing. Okay, so just pause the video there for a second just to finish off this final tile over here. Very much just by going in, fixing it one edge at a time because it was jumping all over the screen. And now I end up with, again, some major shells inside of my UV template over here. And what I want to do is piece them back together so that they actually form kind of like one single shell. So I'm going to take all of these guys and I'm kind of like going to glue them together. And I don't have to be very specific at this stage in terms of how they look, but what I'm going to do is come into edge mode over here, select an edge over here, and again I'm going to do a move and sew one more time over here to connect these two pieces together. Now you can unwrap a cube in many different ways, but again I'm going to do a similar layout to how it looked like inside of Maya. Now I'm going to come over here and just make it purposefully different, because I sometimes find that people go kind of like take things a little bit too literal and think that, you know, everything has to look exactly the same as in Maya. And I just want to make this kind of like little cross kind of like going across like that so that you guys are clear that this is a new image. It's not the same image as what we were working with before when I was doing my UV unwrapping on my box. So here we go. And one of the things I'm paying attention to as well is making sure that my UVs are actually inside these areas as well. Sometimes specific game engines or specific kind of like productions will require you to not have your UVs right to the edge. Moving things to ZBrush and Mudbox sometimes requires that as well. So if I come over here, I've now created a UV layout, and inside my viewport I should be checking as well that all of these little checker pattern grids are kind of like square and proportional. So these look like they're the same size as the ones on the top, which are the same size as the ones on the bottom over here. Sometimes we have to fix that manually. And then this thing over here is going to be the basis for my UV template. And a UV template is going to give me the image that I require to actually use in Photoshop. So to show you what this looks like, if I come over here into polygons and in here in the menus, because it won't appear in the UV tab, inside the UV editor at the bottom over here, you're going to see that I've got this thing called a UV Snapshot. Now this is going to render effectively the contents of my UV editor over here, and it will ask me to choose a type of file that I wish to use, and I will come over here and I will choose something that is flat, like a JPEG, hopefully, that has no alpha channel to it as well, because if you save it sometimes as a Photoshop file or a file that supports an alpha channel, it's actually going to put an alpha channel inside of Photoshop as well, and that will lead to some interesting results later on. And what I'm going to do is make a 1024 by 1024 size image, and then I'm going to choose where it's going to render out, which by default should be to my images folder inside of my Maya project, and anything that you render should appear inside of the images folder. So I've got all of this here, and it gives it a name by default called out UVs, and I'm going to call this crate underscore UV, just like that. Okay, now I've got this all set up inside of my scene over here, so I'm going to press OK over here, and it will render out the actual normals here. Again, one of the things that it's just told me is that I have to have an object selected in order for it to render out. So that it doesn't freak out, I'm going to hit over here, select my object in object mode, press OK, and now it's rendered out my crate UV.jpg. So now if I go into Photoshop, we can open up that file and see what we got. So this is what the actual UV template looks like when it opens up in Maya. Importantly, as I mentioned before, always be aware that there will be an alpha channel in here if you actually render out a file that supports an alpha channel. And that's important because when you render back, actually you'll see that anything that you save in Photoshop will only have textures on those lines per se, because Maya's treating this like a transparent image per se. But this image over here, this 1000 by 1000 pixel image, which is a JPEG currently, is the basis for me to start creating my textures. The first thing that we do with the UV template is it's a good idea to unlock it over here. And one of the things that I like to do specifically is to change this round a little bit. I double clicked on that a little bit too much. But I unlock the layer 0 to turn it into kind of like just a simple base kind of like a layer. And I'm just going to rename this over here UV template over here, and all of my texture work just has to be done inside of these little boxes over here, which is pretty cool. Now this UV template, I'm going to hit Control I or Command I on a Mac, and I'm going to invert it like that because I actually like seeing darker images like this. I'm going to make a new layer, drag it below it, and I'm just going to call this BG for background over here, and I'm going to choose a random brown color for my box over here. I'm just going to fill my layer over here by using Alt and Backspace, or you can use the paint bucket tool inside of Photoshop as well. And what I'm going to do is change the transparency mode of this to multiply, and there you see that now I've got my colored background and I've got on top of it my UV shell, and anything that I do inside of here, I'm going to be doing textures inside of this area. So again, keep in mind that in Maya, each one of these faces inside of the UV editor is a position on that box, and inside of Photoshop, anything that I paint into this UV template will appear on the box over here, like so. So let's just do a quick test of that and actually connect these two files up. I'm going to save a new version of this, and I'm going to go to File, Save As, over here, and I'm going to call this one UVs per se. Let's have a look. Images. I want to make sure that I'm saving in my source images file inside of my project, because that's where my textures will go. So I'm going to go to Create, and I'm going to call this Photoshop PSD. And one of the cool things as well is that we can save PSD files as well in between Maya and Photoshop, just because Maya will recognize Photoshop files and actually allow you to use them as textures. So I'm going to come into here into Maya again and open up the hypershade, and the same way that we've been building everything up until now as well, I'm going to go back to our traditional Lambert shader over here. I'm going to choose Lambert, and after I've selected Lambert, what I'm going to do is actually, no, I'm going to not make a Lambert shader, so I'm just going to Control Z that for a sec. And I'm going to make myself a blend shader because later on I might want to demonstrate something to you guys. So I'm going to make a blend shader over here. I'm going to rename this Create Photoshop, just so that I know where everything's connected. I'm going to go into the color panel over here, click on File, and inside File I'm going to look for the Photoshop file that hopefully I have just saved inside of here. So I've got Create Photoshop.psd. I'm going to open that up, give it a second. It will come in here. If you have a multi-layered file, Photoshop will allow you to actually, Maya will allow you to actually open multiple versions of multiple layered files inside of here as well. And again, one of the things I'll do is just drag this onto here, and you will see what happens is, if I actually just click out of my display over here, there we go. I'll close the UV editor for now. There we go, because all my UV work is done. I'm going to turn off object mode, and hopefully what I should see is exactly what we saw there. Now, one of the cool things to do here as well is make sure that you turn on all of the visibility inside here. There's this little button which kind of is like simple tools, and next to presets, if I click here on the property editor, there's the advanced tool as well, which allows you to see actually all of the options which are inside of the actual material itself. But you'll see that what it's done is that it's created a snapshot of everything that is inside of Photoshop. So it's actually creating this texture with these little lines on top of it. Now, this is going to be very useful for us because I'm going to create a very quick and dirty type of texture as well, reusing some of the assets that I had previously given you as well. So with this UV template made, what I'm going to do is come here and I'm going to open, oops, it should already be actually be open on my phone. I've got my old crate PSD file over here, which I'm just going to go into image over here, and I am going to flatten this. So sorry, edit, layers, flatten visible. I'm just not tempted to use kind of like the keyboard shortcut. Where is this? Bum bum bum. Layer, flatten visible. There we go, down there at the bottom. Flatten image. You can tell it's a long time of that because I always use Control Shift and E to actually do that. So unfortunately, muscle memory is playing against me at that point. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go back into my other create Photoshop file over here, and I'm actually going to make sure that I'm above the background layer, and I'm going to paste this crate in like this. And what I'm going to do is just scale this image over here by pressing Control T or Command T on my keyboard to bring up the free transform tool inside of Photoshop, which I believe is inside of Edit Free Transform in the menus as well. And if I come over here and I just make this scaled like that, you're going to see that it's almost perfect to an extent. It might be out by a few little pixels as well. If I wanted to, I could just go a little bit bigger just to make the framing of this just fit in just a little bit nicer like that. And then what I'll do is that once I've got this laid out like that, I'm just going to take the marquee tool over here. I'm just going to click and drag at the bottom of this. I might have to zoom in quite a bit, so I'm using Control Plus on my keyboard. And I'm just going to come down here to the bottom of this and make sure that I can just trim off to that black line right there. I'm just going to get rid of that there. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the side over here, just to make sure that this is as close to this as possible. Another thing I'll do is just turn on and off this over here, and I think that maybe I should move this over a pixel, just like that, just to allow a little bit of overlap. Oops, that's the wrong layer. So I'm pressing Control and arrow on my keyboard just to move that over a pixel, and then I just need to again do a little trim. Little pro tip, the black lines will be rendered on your actual object, so make sure that everything always fits inside of there. So again, now I've got this little template over here that kind of like allows me to choose where everything goes. So this is my photo texture, like so. And what I need to do now is just duplicate this and stitch it all the way across this UV template. Again, because each face is the same in this case. So again, if I came over here and I used another keyboard shortcut by using the Move tool and grabbed myself Alt and Control, or Alt and Apple, I should be able to, oops, if I'm on the right layer, so I need to be in my photo layer. I'm just going to turn this off for a second over here. I'm actually going to move this and it will duplicate my edges like that, and I can actually move them across like this, and thanks to Photoshop CC's wonderful snapping tool over here, it's going to allow me to come in here and very quickly I should be able to rebuild the UV template that I had over here. So if everything's the right size, which I can tell it's not, it's just out by a few pixels, I will have to come in and actually fix this in just a second over here. But first of all, let's just duplicate everything first, and later on I'll go fixing things. Okay, so there we go. Pretty much almost everything is done there. Okay, cool. I'm just actually going to now come in here, and what I'm going to do is just spend a little bit of time just fixing up these little kind of like things so that all of my UVs actually fit into these actual lines over here. So I'm just going to do a quick pause and come back to that in just a sec. So I've just very quickly finished moving some of these into position over here, and I could spend a lot of time just manipulating how this texture actually looks and make sure that it fits perfectly inside of this template and add additional detail. But what I'm going to do is just hide the UV template upside of here and press Control S or Command S on a Mac to save this file over here. And back in Maya, you're going to see that that texture has still not been loaded into here. Now, inside the advanced properties, you should be able to just click this reload button over here. I'm just going to make sure that I am inside the right place, inside of Maya, and it should reload the new version of the texture that we just saved in Photoshop. Now, I've run into a little bug over here on my Mac. I'm not sure if it's something that's Mac specific, but just in case it doesn't work, you can also reload the file by reopening the file as well. So again, we still need to go into those settings, but hey presto, we have very quickly fixed our little problem like that, and now we've managed to texture our object like this. Now, at this stage, things look very, 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 very similar to how they did with the other mapping that we did earlier with our little proxy file. So again, these two guys will look fairly similar. However, this has a little bit more fine control, and the reason why we want to actually do this, for example, is if I come back into the UV editor, and let's say, for example, this face over here, which is up here at the top, let's say I wanted to write something on this specific face over here. Well, one of the advantages of working with UVs is that UVs allow you to place things very easily. If I come over here into Photoshop and I choose a normal size of text, let's say like 20 points, and let's look for something that kind of like looks kind of like nice and heavy inside of here. Bum, 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 bum. Not American typewriter. Is there any army font inside of here? Bum, bum, bum. Okay, I'm going to take this one, black oak per se, and I'm going to put in here danger over here, and I'm going to make sure that this actually is kind of like a nice red matted color, just like that. There we go. I'm going to press Control T on my keyboard to scale this a little bit. Maybe I'll make it a little bit larger, like that. Again, kind of like very type of Western type of thing over here. And again, I'm just going to ignore that it's, you know, wrapping on top of this, you know, so it's kind of like, again, I would probably have to shift a few pixels inside of here as well. But all I'm going to do is just do this over here. And if I wanted to, I can come into here and just add in an inner glow over here. And instead of using the default settings, I'm just going to use something that's got kind of like a little bit of a gradient to it. So I've changed the translation mode to normal. I'm just making the size of this a little bit bigger, maybe like to 7 over here. And there we go. I'm just going to press OK like that. And I'm going to leave this like this. Not too convinced about the color right now. I'm just going to make that a little bit lighter like that. There we go. Perfect. So I'm going to come over here. There is my little danger part over here, and again, I'd still have to do a little bit of texture work as well, and if I wanted to, I could come over here and do a multiply on top of that just to give it a little bit of an edge there. Or is an overlay going to look better? Not too convinced on either one of those, but I think I'll just take the overlay, and I'll just duplicate that layer twice to make it a little bit darker. So I'm just going to go duplicate layer. There we go. That's more or less what I wanted. Okay, cool. So I've just added something over here. And again, I'm going to basically go and save this file out now. And hopefully the text should appear in Maya when I reload it. So I'm going to come over here, come back into the hypershade, And again, because of this little bug that I'm having over here, instead of using the reload button, I'm actually going to have to come into the text file over here, and I'm going to have to open it one more time over here. So I'm just going to hit create photo. But again, this should just be the click of a button. Now, importantly, my text has appeared upside down, as you can see over here. But that's easy to fix, because back in Photoshop, I can come over here, take these two layers, press Ctrl T, and using Shift and rotate like that. I can rotate it around 90 degrees, and actually I can reposition it a little bit higher like that. And then I press enter like that, because this face is actually displayed over here. So now that I've saved that change with a few clicks of my keyboard shortcuts, come into here, and I come into, again, create Photoshop. There we go. There we go. I now have danger written on the side of my crate, just like that. And I can go into object mode, and I can turn that off just like so. So it's important for us to think that this little box now, even though it looks similar to the previous one that we made, they're made up in two very different ways, where here every face is essentially the same image projected again, and here we've started with that base, but we can customize what each face individually looks like. If I try to write something on this box over here, and I went into my hypershade very briefly, and I went back to the original crate matte material that I made, and I just switched this texture out from my original diffuse texture to a new one, which I have just made over here, which I've called crate danger over here, which is just the same type of idea of the texture with something written on it. When I come over here, you'll see that that text is now written on every single face, while when I'm working with my UV template over here, I can customize every single one of these faces. They could have something completely different written, or I could come into this example over here. I've just added some colors on top of this as well. And again, if I just save this file and go back into Maya and hopefully reload that image over here, but I'm again going to go deep into just reopening the image as well. You shouldn't have to do that. Again, see if it works in your system. And I'm going to come over here and go back to create Photoshop, there we go, and open that up over there. And again, Maya likes jumping between my different screens on a Mac over here. You'll see that again, terrible texturing, but importantly, every single face has a different color right now. And if I wanted to write different numbers or make every single part of the object unique, I can paint whatever I want onto these textures over here. I can take, again, elements like this, duplicate them, there we go, grab myself another set of faces over here, and I know, hopefully, because of the position of these, that if I press Command and T over here, and just rotate it round like that, I can then put another sign on the other side of the box. And because of the way that I've laid out this UV template, hopefully when I save this and reopen it up in Maya one more time, I will be able to see that I've written danger on the other side of my crate again. Okay, so feel free that, again, naming things is very useful, because again, we're going to end up with many different types of textures inside of our scenes, and naming things is just a must at one point, because if not, things get very confusing. So there we go. We've had a look at how to create some very simple UV layouts, how to start actually laying out the UV templates, and how to actually render these UV templates out and actually send them over into Photoshop so that we can actually start texturing our UV tiles and then bringing those textures back into Maya so that we can create a whole series of looks and different elements inside of Maya. Okay, so what I want to do now is select this third oil drum that I've got over here. I'm just going to use Control-1 on my keyboard to hide away all of the other objects. It's just using a viewport filter that I can use by selecting Show, Isolate Select, and turn on View Selected, which I can just do at the click of a button over here. So I'm going to be creating some UVs for this object over here, and I'm going to do it in a very particular way, which is using Maya's bonus tools. Now, inside the bonus tools, which are a series of plugins that Maya 2017 has installed by default, if you have a previous version of Maya, you might have to go onto the Autodesk website and download them because they came as a separate package in 2016 and earlier versions of Maya. But Bonus Tools are a whole series of plugins which are really useful for 3D artists, and I'm really happy that they've included them in this version of Maya 2017 as a default installation inside of the disk. So inside the Bonus Tools, which are available inside of the Modeling Toolkit, I'm looking for a panel with the UV editing tools, and if I click on here, these are just a few little extra tools which are really handy inside of Maya over here. So inside the bonus tools, there's a tool called the Auto Unwrap UVs tool. And this is a really handy and intuitive tool that allows me to select objects in my scene and unfold them as if they were made out of cloth by drawing a series of seams on them and then literally unfolding them as if they were made out of cloth or paper. It's really handy that all I need to do to get started is click this Auto Unwrap tool, and it will give me a few little options to choose the type of unfold that I want to actually make, how I want to lay out my UV shells, and it should go ahead and kind of like, even with these default settings set up, automatically create some fairly decent UVs for me. So if I hit Enter Tool and Closed, the great thing about this tool is that it gives you some heads-up display of what you need to do next. So it's always guiding you step by step through what you have to do. So first of all, it tells me to select an object. I could have had this pre-selected and it would have jumped over this step. And then it's going to hit Continue over here. It's temporarily going to assign a texture over here. It's going to ask me to define some edges for my texture borders. So this is really defining what we call the seams, where we want this object to unfold from. And for this oil drum, again, as an example that we saw last week, if I start selecting different areas of where I want my UVs to unwrap, I might select things like double-clicking on this loop around the top of the oil drum, kind of like the little lid over here, and I will add a border over here, and you'll see that it adds this red highlighted line saying that that's going to be a seam. Then I could choose, say for example, one of these edges over here. Normally it's good to choose a seam that is somewhere tucked away where you're not going to see it very clearly. And let's say, for example, if I grabbed this edge over here, you could choose one of the outer ones, but I'm going to choose one of these inner ones over here, and I'm going to hit add a border there as well. So that's my second border. I can also do it round the bottom of the object as well, so I'm going to double click here to do a loop selection and click Add Border by pressing the Add Border button over here. If you ever get it wrong, you can hit the Remove Borders button and they'll all just disappear, and you can start away again if you want to. And then we have to choose where along the height we're going to do our seam. So if I wanted my object to be seen from here, maybe what I'll do is that I'll just add a seam around the back over here. And again, thanks to Maya's selection tools, this can be very easy, because what I do is that I'm just going to zoom in to this area next to where that edge is, and I'm going to click on the first edge over here, and then I'm going to go all the way down and shift and double click at the end over here. So Maya will basically make a selection from my first edge over here, and double click on the end selection over there, and it creates a perfect line just like that following the geometry. And I'll add my last border there. So you'll see that hopefully what I'm going to do is unfold the top of this, unfold this little cap over there, unfold the sides, and unfold the bottom of this object over here. Really nice, simple, and easy. And as soon as that's done, I'm going to hit Continue. And now it's kind of like jumped around a little bit over here, and if I open up my UV editor, hopefully I should see if this has done anything over here. Now, I think sometimes, most of the times, you might see better results than this, and it should actually unfold this a little bit further than it has done right now. That's a little bit strange, so what I'm going to do is very briefly just select all of my shells over here, and actually it should do an unfold operation automatically. But if I do this manually and just hit unfold over here, you're going to see that it's going to unfold all of the pieces of my oil drum over here as best it can. And if I turn on this checker pattern, you're going to see that it's going to create a variety of results like that. Now, the unfold tool, it isn't perfect, but it should give us a great starting point for us to start organizing our UV shells. So for example, if I come over here and I just start moving some of these shells around a little bit, just so that I can actually see what scale they have over here, we can repeat the same operations that we've been doing before of looking at the size of the little squares which are contained inside of these UV shells, and we can rotate them around and try to visually map them like this. And again, this is just about organizing how our UVs actually look like, which the unfold tool has given us quite some easy UV shells to actually start playing around with. Again, I know from a fact that this one is a lot smaller than it should be, again, so my Maya kind of like playing up on me. You guys should have varying results in terms of how this looks. So your UVs might look a lot better than mine over here. So I've got all of these roughly to the same size, and now I'm going to look at the middle section over here. It's done quite a good job of unfolding it again, but again, it's never absolutely perfect right the way around. So what I'm going to do very quickly is go through here and actually start organizing some of the UVs a little bit, just by moving things into a more organized manner per se. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use again some of the align tools. I'm going to go into my UVs over here, and thanks to the power of ring and loop, I can shift and double click. Oops, to select one UV edge. I'll do this in selection mode over here, and I should be able to shift and double click here. There we go, and select all of those edges over there. And if I wanted to, I could use these align tools up here, which are the little arrows that you can see here, to align these horizontally or vertically as I see fit, like this. So I can just come over here, again, double click, there we go. And again, I can use G on my keyboard to repeat the last command, like so, like so, like so. And then again, what I'll do is just make sure that I have only the top UVs selected by doing a click and drag like this. So I've got all of those there, and they will align to the minimum section over here. Now again, this isn't perfect because I'll have to look at this now and look at these edges per se. But you'll see that little by little I can actually start moving around these UVs until they're kind of like pointing in the right direction, and that will just take me a few minutes to actually repeat like this. And what I'm going to do very briefly is pause the video over here, and I'm going to start basically repeating this align over here and start getting all of my UVs to kind of like be in the right place. And you'll see it will just take me a few minutes to do that very quickly by using the keyboard shortcuts, selecting things, and using G to repeat my last command. And then I'll also do it in the vertical as well to make sure that everything's lined up perfectly. So we're back, and I've just finished laying out my UVs very quickly. And you can see that I've done the same thing that I've been doing all the way through, making sure that my UVs are pretty much square, that they're kind of like the same size consistently across my object, and I've done a little bit of tidying up over here. Now, there still are some issues, again, that I will have to come in and fix. So you can see that there's a little bit of UV kind of like distortion here and here as well, and we'd maybe want to go and fix that as well. Again, all of the tools in Maya aren't perfect the same time round. They always kind of like require you to do a little bit of manual labor on them. So one of the things that I can do is that there's a whole host of tools over here which are really handy if you have a graphics tablet, because they allow you to actually paint on top of the UVs to actually change them ever so slightly by moving them, sewing pieces together, doing all sorts of fun little things like that. It can work with the mouse as well, but you just have to keep your left mouse button clicked while you move over these surfaces as well. So this is something that can speed up your workflow quite considerably. If I'm in UV mode by right-clicking here and I click on one of my UVs, if I use Control or the Command key on an Apple computer and press right-click, so Control or Apple and press right-click, you can see that I can change my selection by bringing up this little contextual menu, and I'll choose to shell border over here, and it's going to select all of the UVs that go around the edge of my object like that. I'm going to use a little trick of pressing Shift and then dragging a marquee selection so that I've selected all of the UVs that are inside of my selection like this. So I'm basically keeping the border in the same place like that. So that's fine, and all the manipulations I do in here will be just fine. The tool that I actually want to use is the Paint Unfold tool, which is this one over here, which allows me to unwrap my UV mesh. And these tools will only work on the UVs that I have highlighted, so that's very helpful for me. For example, if I just made a little mistake and pushed this Move tool over here, I get a little brush like the same tools that we've been using in Maya before, and I can use the B key to change the size of the brush that I'm working with, and you'll see that I'll be able to move things around in space like this. This is very handy for us to make little changes, but you're going to see that it's going to radically warp the look of my UVs. If I can actually see, oh, there it is down there. That's where my pinching is happening, as you can see. So what's going to happen is that if I wanted to fix this, I can use this Unfold tool over here, and you'll see that as I move this, this is actually going to apply an unfold operation only to the area that I have selected. If I click like out here, you're going to see that nothing's changing. Again, that's because it's not selected in terms of my UVs. And what I can do is that I can come to specific areas inside of my UV template, like over here, as you can see. And what I can do is that I can start dragging out some of these UVs, and that should start removing some of the pinching that we saw earlier. Again, if I come up here and I start looking around, if I start dragging up here at the top, I should start seeing that I start fixing some of these issues over here, and you'll see that some of those UVs will be pushed back into place like so. Again, it really depends on how you've laid your UVs out, but just doing a little bit of this relax motion over here should help make that distortion over here just a little bit less apparent over there. And if I really needed to go into some very, very, very fine detail as well, I can go into the UVs over here and just figure out where these UVs specifically are. They're over here. Actually, I should have this object probably inverted. So I'm going to come over here and switch to my Move tool, come over into my shell selection mode, select all of this. I'm going to use some of these tools over here to quickly rotate this round 180 degrees. This is like 40-degree increments as it goes up, just so that I've got these UVs in a slightly more organized place. So again, depending on what I'm looking for, I might have to use more of this tool or less of this tool as I see necessary. But again, it's a very easy way for me to select things, and again, using the correct keyboard shortcuts just to go ahead and go fixing areas as I see fit. Oops, let me hold Shift and select there, so I select the opposite of my selection. There we go. And then again with the tools, you'll see that we can start playing around with any of these specifically, and we can start again moving things around as necessary. So I'm going to come into that area where I saw a little bit of pinching. I'm just going to come in here and see if I can move these UVs around a little bit. So again, I'm looking for the correct spot. Should be round about here, and you can see that I can just push these UVs a little bit like that, just along like that. And again, if I want to be very, very, very precise, again, I can just move that just a little bit like that and double check that I'm actually kind of like looking at the right place. A little bit of a highlight on this object as well would be great. So again, you can see that I can use these tools over here to select things like that. Again, be careful because there is a sew tool over here, so if I wanted to, I could make selections of my UVs and just drag along, and they would automatically sew themselves together again. So if I wanted to connect this up over here, I technically should be able to come in here, grab myself my UVs, do a little selection of the UVs in here, and I'll do a selection of the UVs here and here. And if I wanted to connect these together very quickly, I could just come into here and basically start painting away on these if they are in the same space. So I'm just going to come into here, into the shell, select this over here, and keep moving around like that. A little bit closer. So again, just as an example, let's grab these guys here, let's choose the sew tool, and you'll see that now they highlight, and they'll allow me to connect them up together like that. So if I wanted to reattach these things, these little painting tools are really useful. You just need to make sure that you have the right selection and that they're roughly in the right area if you're actually working with sewing them together just like that. But again, that was just an example. It's not what I wanted, so I'm just going to undo that very quickly. But it allows you to be very flexible and play around with things in various different ways. So again, these tools are a little bit more advanced. They're mostly designed to help you kind of like work on very complex organic objects quickly and efficiently. But ultimately what we want to be doing is generating, again, a UV template, which at one point we will come over here, take a UV snapshot, and render it out into Photoshop. So with that, we've got a huge selection of tools that we can work with inside of Maya, and you'll see that this process of building UVs is just a little bit labor intensive, but you're going to see that all the projection methods and all of the unfold tools, even this amazing tool inside of the bonus tool, is remarkably useful, and there's some other little settings in here as well. So importantly, UVs have to happen before we unfold any part of our object and before we can even start considering doing some bitmap texturing inside of programs like Photoshop or any image editing software. To finish off, what I want to show you guys is the basics of how to start setting up a shader inside of Maya. Now currently we've been applying texture maps to each one of these objects, but we've only been using the diffuse channel. Now this is a very limited way of thinking about texturing, but it's the starting point. The base color of an object is really important, but we need to control other properties inside of the textures. Now importantly, I'm going to be talking about three main textures now: the diffuse map, the specular map, and the bump map. There'll be a download link for the video for this week containing these files as well. And what I've done with my last box over here is that I've just done a very quick UV unwrap over here. And what I've done is that I've taken each one of the faces of this crate, and what I've done is I've kind of like just unfolded them, you know, using a planar map and scaling in these little faces over here, just to make sure that all of the faces which are here are exactly the same on the cube. They're all UV coordinate 1, 1 over here. So if I basically just kill this down over here, okay, so it's all of the UVs are displaying just one single image, which is going to look like this over here. So I've got currently the diffuse image, which is the same image that we've been using in open in Photoshop over here, but I've also created this specular image over here, which is just a black and white version of my original image over here. Just push the levels and the contrast value up a little bit like that. And then I've generated a third image, which is a normal image over here. This is created with a piece of software called Crazy Bump, which is free and available for people who have a Macintosh. But effectively, if it had a black and white version of it, it would be kind of like the pattern of the surface roughness of the actual object over here. So again, I'm going to leave this on its normal display over here. But those three images alongside with Arnold are going to help me make my crate look a little bit more believable. So to do this, what I'm going to do is, first of all, isolate my little cube over here. I'm just going to hide it away like that. And because I'm going to be rendering this out in Arnold to be able to see what it looks like, I need to add a light into my scene. And I'm going to add a very basic light inside of Arnold. If you ever want to see something, just click on the Arnold tab in the menus, look for lights, and create a sky dome light. And that will create a little sphere like this, which will project light into my scene, which is very handy. Now, I've got an HDR image, which I have pre-downloaded, and I'm going to add this into my scene to make it work as a background for my light. Now, don't worry about this. As I go onto here, you'll see that an HDR is very easy to add into the color of this light, the same way that I could add textures into my lights. I've downloaded some images from a site called HDR Labs, which I will be talking about next week when we do our shaders tutorial. And I found myself a little interior HDR image over here, and I'm looking for my Newport environment HDR over here, which is actually quite a chunky size as well. If I come over here, I should look for, there's an 8K HDR image inside of a JPEG, which should be just fine for what I'm going to do over here. And I'm just going to click on this over here, and you're going to see that this is going to add a 3D kind of like texture background into my scene over here. Now what Arnold's going to do is that Arnold's going to use this background image as lighting information. So hopefully I should see some interesting highlights appear on my scene just like this. So what I'm going to do is just jump back for a second over here and look for my light. And as I can't see it, I'm going to go into Windows, Outliner, and just select the Arnold Skydome light over here. And as you notice that the resolution of this image could be a lot higher. It's an 8000 JPEG, which is very, very, very high in resolution, but hopefully my little laptop should be able to handle it just fine. And I'm just amping up the resolution of my Skydome light, but this might slow down my processor just a little bit while it calculates everything that needs to be done, like so. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to now start building some materials inside of Maya. And to do that, I'm going to open up the Hypershade by clicking on the Hypershade button. And we're going to make ourselves a new Arnold shader over here. So I'm going to type in AIS to create an Arnold standard shader over here. And if this is ever getting any very cluttered, what I'm going to do is just click on the Inputs and Outputs tab over here, and that will allow me to create my little texture over here. Now, because of this real-time preview over here, my fans are going to start kicking off, so apologies for that in advance. I really need to get a microphone of some sorts to try and avoid this from happening in future. I'll see what I can do. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to start by adding the textures that I made earlier, that I showed you in Photoshop, into the right place. And what I want to do is that inside the color swatch over here, I'm going to add a file, and I'm going to look for my diffuse map over here. So inside my source images folder over here, I've got an image that you guys can download, which is called Create Original Diffuse. Let me just organize these by name so that you guys can see it. And I'm going to hit open over here. And you should see that this updates in my real-time display like this. And we've got a little wooden texture projected on top of a sphere, just as we normally do. Now, if I click on the workspace over here, it's going to jump back to display the workspace properties. And what I want to do is actually connect the specular property to, I've got a specular map that I want to connect to color and to weight. So what I'm going to do is click on here, choose File. And this file now is going to be connected to my specular map, which I will pick through here, and I've named it Create Original Spec.png. Now I'm going to click on this and give it a second and go back over here. The one where it's really going to have an impact is if I connect it to the weight panel over here. So again, I'll choose File, come in here and look for, again, my specular file over here and open that up, and boom, it bursts into light like this. As with all things with texturing, don't panic when you see weird stuff happening over here. Yes, this wood's going to be really, really, really reflective for effect, but what I'm going to do is inside the AI standard over here, I still haven't played around with any of these properties over here. So you'll see that if I take this roughness property over here and I bring it down, it's going to become very glossy, and if I bring it up, it's going to be less and less glossy. So I'm going to give it like a value of 0.55 over here. It's still very glossy. But if I turn this option here, which is called Fresnel, on, and I click on it, you're going to see that now it's going to look a lot dimmer. And the reason for that is that the Fresnel is only going to make it reflective if the light actually hits it at the right angle in respect to the camera, and that's going to help us a lot in terms of actually seeing that. So we'll see some of this glowiness on the actual material, but it's going to be really diminished thanks to this wonderful property here called Fresnel. Now, the next thing I need to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of surface distortion, and I'm going to do that by adding in a bump map. Now I'm using a normal in this case, but you'll see that in the drop-down menus over here inside of Arnold, I've got a bump map option over here. And as I click on this over here, it's going to wire everything together again, and it's going to allow me to choose a file, and it creates this bump 2D node. Now this bump 2D node can be using a bump map, or it can be using a tangent space normal. Again, inside of this bump node, there is an option here for choosing what's the type of displacement that I want to create. Well, I'm using a normal map, so I'm using a tangent space normal, and inside here, inside of my file, which I can get to either by clicking here or clicking here inside of my shader network, I can go over here and I can look for that normal map, the little purple one that I was looking for, and I can hit OK. Now, the normal map is normally fairly subtle in its shape. Let's see if looking at a shader ball, I can see a little bit more of the detail than it may or may not have. I'm just waiting for that to update in real time as we go along. Maybe, maybe a teapot might be able to see it a little bit clearer. Again, choose whichever one of these options you want to work. But the main thing about the normal map is that it should be fairly subtle. If I go back to the bump 2D node, which I can also get to inside of the attribute editor, I know for a fact that this value of 1 is going to be way too high. And actually a value of like 0.1 is going to maybe be just subtle enough. Sometimes the values of these can go really low, like 0.005, etc. The bump map should normally be usually very subtle in its effect. So, if I just select this AI standard and I display all of the shading network, this is what we've created over here. And I've got a whole series of other tutorials to talk to you guys about next week about how to keep creating these shader networks. But this is what's going to allow me to define how this wood is going to look like, and if it is varnished and shiny, or if it's old and decayed, and we'll be able to choose how the wood looks like in base of the texture maps that we've added into our scene like that. To make all of this come to life, what I need is to be able to render this out. And if I look around my scene over here, I can see that the light is kind of like coming in from the windows. I can see there's a little bit of that reflection there, so maybe I might be able to get some light rendering off the top of over here. So I'm just going to do a quick test render for you guys to show you what my scene would look like. Okay, so one of the changes that I made was I actually switched out the HDR that I was using originally, just because this HDR that I'm using now, which is an interior of a factory, has much better kind of like lighting for actually seeing how this looks. One of the tricky things with HDRs is that you're pretty much tied into how they look in terms of their lighting effects. But as you can see from the render, the actual result is actually really cool. And what you can do again is grab yourselves your objects of any sorts, and if I turn on the Arnold render view again, you're going to see that this material over here is going to look reasonably nice like that. And another thing that's really interesting about Arnold as well is that if you just create a simple polygon plane over here and we scale it up as best as we can, so if I just click here and create an image plane, you're going to see that the materials that come in by default, like this one over here, they're going to cause some indirect illumination onto the actual object as well. You can just about tell that my crate is actually floating a little bit in midair as this interactive preview kicks in like that. So I might just have to lower it a little bit into the ground, just like that. There we go. And you're going to see that we're going to have some fairly nice looking wooden material over here as well, which I'll just retouch very briefly for you guys so that you're able to see what this is looking like, okay? So importantly, in my final render, I should start seeing that there is some parts of the image that are slightly more reflectant than others, and that we're also going to see the little effect of that bump map starting to come in to create kind of like the nice little kind of like bumps and grooves in the wood as well. If you ever get your processor to kind of like go a little bit too crazy right now, I'll show you an end result of what this can look like. You can always press the stop button over here inside of the Arnold render view, and that will pause what your objects will, the rendering of your objects here, so it won't be refreshing constantly again and again and again and again. So with some additional tweaking, what we're starting to do is really see the difference between these two objects over here, where really it's like this one just has a base material, the same as the ground over here, which again has got really, you know, not much information at all. And I can make this old looking wooden crate type of look by going ahead and making sure that I've got a good resolution for my images. I've got my UVs laid out, and then I have to start putting together shaders in order to create the different effects of the different materials which are available in my scene. So we're going to leave it here for this week, per se. We've already covered a lot of material on UVs and just the very basics of how to set up a shader over here, but we're going to go into even more detail and show you guys how to create shaders with loads of different looks in the tutorial next week. And it's a good time for you guys to, you know, practice making your own objects and trying to figure out how to unwrap them, because again, these are still a box and a cylinder, very simple things. So with that, we're going to finish for this week. Thanks very much for working your way through this over here. I hope you guys have learned a lot, and especially thank you very much for everyone who has contributed, subscribed, or commented on the channel. It's really great to see you guys actually kind of like working through your things and having questions as well. And especially if you enjoy the tutorials, you want to learn more, you can subscribe if you haven't subscribed before, or if you drop us a like, that would be great as well. But importantly, with all the stuff that we're doing here in Maya, is to give you guys a solid foundation, step by step, and explain to you guys how you can start creating your own textures, and hopefully for this to help you kind of like start making the 3D scenes that you want to make. So importantly, that's the end for this week. I'll see you again next week for another tutorial. And until then, keep learning and keep strong. And I'll be looking forward to see you guys in the future. Take care. Bye-bye.